Today I come before you as the latest member of the Cult of Costa. After a lot of planning, I recently completed my DIY display cabinet, which I'll be using to display my Hot Toys vehicles and figures. This project was inspired by Costa from Pop Culture Living Room and his tutorial videos on how to complete the transformation from garage shelving unit to display case. In this video, I'm not going to go over the full process as Costa did a great job of explaining this in his videos. Instead, I'm going to highlight the different materials I used for my take on this project and share some of the lessons I learned through the process as someone who really isn't that great at DIY. And for the Aussie collectors out there, I will be mentioning where I got my materials from. This is just for reference purposes. I don't have any affiliation with the businesses that I mention in this video. And please note that any prices I mention are in Australian dollars. So with that said, this is how I built my DIY display case. For my garage shelving unit, I used the Pinnacle 2090 series. That's 209 centimeters high by 120 centimeters wide and 54 centimeters deep. That's around 6 foot 10 inches high by 4 feet wide and 1 foot 10 inches deep. I bought this from Bunnings for around $120. The thing I like about the Pinnacle shelving unit is that the corners of each MDF shelf are already cut out. That means you don't have to go and cut out notches to allow the electrical wires for your lighting to go through the cabinet. I selected this shelving unit because of the extra height. A standard 1.8 unit would have only given me 3 shelves. I really wanted to have 4 shelves that had enough vertical height to ensure a good viewing angle no matter where I was looking at the cabinet from. For the back panels and shelves, I used aluminium composite material, also known as ACM. Think of it like a thin metal sheet. Each ACM panel has been covered in matte black vinyl, which means that the new shelving unit fits in with the aesthetic of the glass cabinets that I already have. With the ACM sheets, the back panels are 3mm thick and the panels I've used on top of the MDF shelves are 2mm thick. The 3mm ACM back panel actually can fit between the garage shelving frame and the wooden shelf. So it can hold in place with just friction. This was something I tested out during the research phase of this project, but despite the fact that it could just stay in place on its own, I did use some professional mounting tape across the top of the ACM panel just to adhere it into place. Once I mounted the ACM backing panel in place, I then positioned the wooden shelf that came with the shelving unit. And on top of that, that's where I placed my 2mm vinyl wrapped ACM panel. As I was sitting the ACM panel on top of the existing wooden shelf, this means that you could see the cut within the ACM panel visually, and I didn't want that. So what I actually had was I got the vinyl wrapped across the front of the ACM panel, which just ensures a really professional finish and a clean look. For those interested, the cost of the ACM panel and the matte black vinyl was around $240. For this project, I opted to use custom lighting. One of the big objectives of this build was ensuring that the new case fit in with the aesthetic of what I already had. So I bought all the materials to make the lighting strips myself with the help of my brother, and I purchased all of the lighting supplies from M&M Electrical. They're a franchise that has stores Australia-wide. For the lighting, I used 2 meter lengths of corner channel profile, which came with a light diffuser, a 5 meter roll of LED light strip, a LED light controller, which allows the LED light strips to be dimmed, and I can do that through an app on my mobile phone, a power source, quick connector chips, and a power plug. I also purchased some electrical wire and some heat shrink wrap, which I just got from Jcar. The total cost of the lighting was around $250. The long story short with the assembling of these custom lights is that the LED light strips actually have an adhesive backing to them. So all you have to do is peel this off and adhere the lights to the channel profile. Once you've done this, you can then use the quick connector chip and you attach that to the LED light strip, and then you snap the diffuser in place. When this is all done, you can then solder electrical wire from the wire that comes out of the quick connector chip and then that is eventually attached to the power source. So with these lights, to ensure there was no voltage drop, these were all run in parallel. When you daisy chain lights, you run the risk that there's voltage drop between each shelf. So that means the lighting won't always be consistent from the top shelf to the bottom shelf. So once we completed the lighting, we just mounted it in place using that same industrial strength mounting tape that I used to adhere the ACM to the frame. So the aluminium channel profiles I bought were 2 meters wide. I only needed them to be 1.2 meters wide because that's how long my shelves were. So that meant I had quite a few offcuts, but then I was able to use those offcuts to help with the cable management within the cabinet. So to do this, we just measured the height of each shelf. We used a jigsaw to cut the aluminium channel profile to size. We then mounted the profile to the cabinet using some of the mounting tape. And then where you would normally put the LED light strip, that's where we fed the electrical wires. And then we snapped the light diffuser in place just to hold all the cables in. So this was a really neat way of managing all the cables, and it was a good use of something that otherwise would have been discarded. Acrylic isn't cheap, and I didn't want to risk messing it up by trying to cut it myself. So I did have my panels cut to size. Like Costa's display, I covered the edge of the acrylic in vinyl tape and then connected the acrylic panels to the shelving unit using magnetic tape. On the side panels, I've used 2mm thick acrylic, and for the front, I've used 3mm thick panels. The acrylic cost me just under $150 and was purchased locally. I sourced the vinyl tape locally from a store called Sydney Tools. They sold 2-inch thick rolls, which were around 33 meters in length. I estimate that I used about 25 meters of vinyl tape for the project, so one roll gave me more than I needed, and that roll cost me around $60. I purchased the magnetic tape from an online store called Frenergy Magnets that are based in New South Wales. The specific product was called Magnafix magnetic tape, and it came in quite large 30-meter rolls that were $45 each. This was the most cost-effective option I found for magnetic tape. A lot of smaller rolls would have been quite expensive for the volume that I needed. I used just over 2 rolls of magnetic tape, which was more than I anticipated, and I'll explain why I ended up using more magnets than I thought I would need in the lessons learnt section of this video. So being on the other side of this project now, there's 10 key lessons that I learnt that I was keen to pass on to you. So if you decide to undertake this project, they'll hopefully make things a little bit smoother for you. First of all, a lot of tasks are easier with 2 people. I was lucky to have my brother with me during the duration of the build, and it definitely made a lot of tasks easier having that second set of hands. My second lesson is with the acrylic panels, and if I had my time again, I would have opted to get panels with a printed border on them rather than using the vinyl tape. Adding vinyl tape is quite a fiddly process and can be a bit unforgiving at times. Costa is 100% right that the more you do it, you definitely develop a knack for it. But I would have saved a lot of time and I think had a slightly more professional result if I had gotten a border printed onto the acrylic panel. If I made more of these cabinets in the future, that's definitely one big change I would make. I would opt to have a laser printed border on the acrylic rather than using vinyl tape. So if you do opt to use the vinyl tape, I personally think this is something that is a lot easier to do with 2 people. With the extra set of hands, you can have one person giving the tape some slack and holding it taut and also helping guide the tape against your guideline, and the second person can really focus on just adhering the tape smoothly to the acrylic. I actually found that rather than using my hand to flatten down the tape, using a bank card to lay the tape onto the acrylic actually gave me a really smooth result and was a better way of doing it. When applying the vinyl tape, another big issue is dust. So if you have a second person, that is another thing that can help you greatly, having that extra pair of hands to wipe any dust off the acrylic panel. If you have any dust on your acrylic, that will cause air bubbles in the tape. So it is really important to keep the acrylic as clean as you can to minimize any air bubbles. So if you remember earlier, I mentioned that I needed to use a lot more magnetic tape than I anticipated, and that was to do with the shelving unit I selected. My taller shelving unit uses a metal plate to connect the vertical structure in place. That means you technically shouldn't put a shelf where the connector plate is, but that's where I needed it to be. After mucking around with a lot of different configurations for shelf height, I kept coming back to needing to have the shelf where the connector plate was. So to do this means we had to pry open the connector plate just a little bit to allow the shelf to slot into place, and then we did our best to close the plate up as much as we could. What I didn't consider at the time was doing this actually raised the profile of the connector plate even more from the vertical structure of the cabinet, meaning that more depth was needed from the magnetic tape to ensure the acrylic panel sat flush to the frame and ensured a secure connection. This was a problem of my own making, so that's on me. The lesson that I learnt that I wanted to share with you is that it's important to look at the construction of the shelving unit you select. With the shorter 1.8 meter pinnacle units, they actually connect with an internal pin system, so that means the exterior frame is pretty flat. Any unit like mine that uses an external connector plate is going to have sections of the exterior of the cabinet that have a raised profile. So when this happens, you need to make sure that the depth of the magnets you're using can accommodate those raised sections of the frame. In my situation, the magnetic tape I used was about 1.5 millimeters thick. So in the raised section of the cabinet, I actually had to use 3 strips of magnetic tape to have the gap needed to make sure everything was connected securely. If I'd identified this problem beforehand, I could have looked into either finding some thicker magnetic tape or some different magnet options that would have meant this situation could have been avoided. So with my choice of material, the ACM and the vinyl, it is a little bit more expensive, but it was a big time saver and I think has resulted in a really professional finish. In building this display cabinet, the easiest step was adhering the back panels and the shelving. We pretty much did a dry run before we then mounted everything down. And this only took about 30 minutes. It was really quick, and I know it probably cost a little bit more than using MDF and fabric, but it was a big time saver and I'm really happy with the way it looks. When it comes to creating the vinyl border around your acrylic, make sure you take your own measurements. When I looked at my shelving unit, the dimensions I needed were quite different to what Costa suggested in his video, and my main objective was to try to hide as much of the frame as possible, which the ACM did a good job of doing that with the backing, but with the front of the unit, I wanted to make sure you couldn't see any of the frame. So for me, this actually meant that for the top of the top panel, a 2-inch border of vinyl tape wasn't actually enough to hide the entire frame. So what I ended up doing was I actually adhered some of the vinyl tape to the shelving unit itself, just to make sure the color blended in. So now even when that little bit of the frame is visible, it's not noticeable. So another reason I probably used a few more magnets than I thought I would was because I found some opportunities to do double layers of tape, particularly on the sides and the top of the cabinet. And I did that to make sure that the panels weren't going to go anywhere. So if you have that same opportunity to do some double layers of tape, definitely do it. My shelving unit had 2 flat ridges within the 2-inch border of the vinyl tape at the top and bottom of the cabinet. So I placed 2 strips of magnetic tape for extra security on both the side panels and the top of the front panel. The side panels in particular, even though it's 2 millimeters thick, the panels are quite heavy. So having this extra layer of tape at the top and bottom, this was a decision I happily made just to make sure they would be secure and in place. So having come to the end of this project, I've had a few people ask me whether I'm happy with the result and if I would do it again. And my answer to that is absolutely. Like any project, there might be some points of frustration along the way, and the first build is always going to be the hardest, especially when there's differences in the materials and the products that are available in different countries. Overall, I'm really happy with the outcome, and this project ticked all of the major boxes for me in wanting a new display case for my room. This new cabinet matches the aesthetic of what I already have when it comes to the lighting and the use of the matte black vinyl. It's large enough to house all my vehicles, and it gives me the extra room I wanted to grow my collection. Even though I used some more expensive materials, the total cost of this project was around $950. This is $1,000 cheaper than what it would have cost me to buy 4 modular case DF120s, which is around the equivalent display space to what I've created. It's also considerably cheaper than glass cabinet options I found locally. A lot of them were around the $2,000 mark and then would have required lighting and matte black vinyl to be applied. So that's a quick look at my DIY display case. If you have any questions specific to my build, feel free to ask me in the comments below. Costa really is the godfather of this concept, so be sure to check out his instructional videos for information on how to build these cabinets, hanging display cabinets, and even risers. I've popped the links to his videos in the description. Overall, I'm really happy with the outcome of this project. A huge thank you goes to Costa for his inspiration and also for answering my questions. Also, a huge shout out to my friend Peter for his help with the ACM, the matte black vinyl, and the acrylic. He cut them to size and applied the vinyl for me, and it's a really professional finish and I couldn't be happier. And also a huge thank you to my brother Bill, who helped me across the course of this project and has done all the lighting for my cabinets. He's done an amazing job and my display would not look as good as it does without him. If you like this video, please remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. I really appreciate your support. The next step for me is going to be filling up these cabinets, so keep an eye out on my Instagram. I'll be posting some photo updates, and in the near future, I'll do a collection room tour so you can see how everything's coming together.